You're tuned into the Advocai Health Podcast. We're here to talk about rare diseases, real people, and the ripple effects of change. Stories that move you, guests who challenge the norm, and vibes that keep it real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the ASH Podcast. I'm here by myself again, and I'm going to do something similar to what I did last time, which is go through an article on a recent article from the Health Policy Watch titled Global Health Leaders Urge Fewer Agencies Amid Funding Crisis. Now, this is a longer article, so I'll try to go through everything. We might end up having a bit of a longer episode, and I'll try to keep it under 40 minutes. Hopefully you guys won't get too annoyed of my voice by then. And then if you're still watching, then hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of it. I will scroll through it as I go on. It'll be on the screen. And I'm going to actually just start now. One thing I'll preface, because I do want to get into this quick, is I'm not an expert. I don't have any secret source to this information. I'm just someone reading this information, getting an idea or giving an idea of what the fallout could be, what my opinions are on it, so and so. All right, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. We're going to do like a bit of a side-by-side thing. Hopefully you should guys just see my face and the screen at the same time. I'll scroll up. Here's the article. Like I said, title says Global Health Leaders Urge Fewer Agencies Amid Funding Crisis. I've got a bunch of highlights here for maybe different sections or things I wanted to just point out. I might merge a couple of them to save on time, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, kind of playing this by ear right now. First things foremost, I think the best way to get this in is just talk about this highlight right here in the yellow, which is global development assistance for health fell 21% between 2024 and 2025, driven almost entirely by a 67% drop in US financing, which is more than $9 billion. So heavily reliant on the US. Here's another aspect that I think is important to show is the reliance on the US, which is the Lancet published estimates saying that US aid saved 90 million lives over the past 2 decades, including 30.4 million children under the age of 5. But now that, as we know, US aid has pulled out of a lot of places, this could result in approximately 14 million preventable deaths in the next 4.5 years. So by 2030, if these cuts aren't closed, or the gaps created by these cuts aren't closed. So I think from these numbers, the biggest thing you see is over-reliance on one country, or too much influence or too much dependence on one country. This becomes a interesting topic because it reveals a lot about what the global health situation or architecture is like. And it makes me want to ask, do you think global health funding should be dependent on large donor countries and yearly budgets rather than maybe a more stable collective funding model? In my review, relying on a handful of donor nations creates extreme vulnerability. When politics, economy, public sentiment shift in one country, it creates a ripple effect. So a more stable model, maybe including regional funding, predictable multilateral commitments, a greater role for domestic financing, etc. These are all maybe better ways to move forward. Not that donor funding is bad. It's a good thing, but we are currently in a system that assumes that everything is going to stay constant. So it's assuming that, okay, the US gave this much last year, maybe the UK gave that much, or I don't know, what's another super wealthy country, Canada, France, I don't know. These countries gave so-and-so. Then, of course, they're going to do that every year. That's not, guaranteed. It's a very volatile situation to be in. So that's a place for concern. And I apologize. I'm going to do a lot of scrolling up and down in this article. As you can see, it is kind of long to review in 30 minutes, or roughly 30-40 minutes. But next thing I want to highlight is a fact here that says tens of millions of lives, particularly among children under 5 and people in the world's poorest nations, are threatened by these cuts. So just by the US cuts, we're talking, not anything huge. And the reason this is also so important is right here where it says in the area of HIV, when the US paused their development assistance in February, the whole global response on HIV/AIDS, the US was shouldering 73% of the total burden. That's nearly three-fourths. That's basically three-fourths, actually. I'm not even going to say nearly. Like 73% is basically three-fourths of the global support on HIV, of the global fight on HIV. I mean, over time, this means that mortality will rise, morbidity will increase, long-term care will suffer, long-term development will suffer in regions that need this funding or are reliant on this funding. And again, we're back to this conversation of one donor bearing 73% of the global funds, like global program funding. This next, what do you call it, quote, also said by Dr. I don't know, sorry, not doctor, by Winnie Bianima. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. The executive director of UNAIDS, that the rest of the world was shouldering 27%. That's not right. Here, I actually agree with that. Like, I agree with that statement. It's not right that one country should shoulder 73% of a financial burden while the rest of the world is shouldering 27. And that's not because I have some, like, sentiment towards the US or anything like that. Morally, I do believe if you have the funds to help in a global setting, you should do so. And we see that with some organizations, some of the world's richest people, like Bill and Melinda Gates, who have the Gates Foundation, which I will sort of talk about slightly later on. But that does mean everyone else should just sit back. There shouldn't be such a heavy reliance, because when you have that reliance, as soon as one country backs out, you're kind of, I'm not going to say the word I want to say, but you're done for. You really, really are done for. And the problem isn't always in the case of, is there like a money shortage, or is there issue with financing? It's maybe an issue of priorities, right? So here we have like a mix of situations where, on one hand, global donor budgets are under pressure. So inflation is a crisis right now. Domestic crises are going on. Political fatigue is playing a role. On the other hand, donors are reprioritizing. And I think a lot of this maybe happened after COVID. People or nations started reprioritizing themselves when they saw how far behind they were on their national health issues. But at the same time, instead of just health and diverting a bit from that COVID argument, nations are prioritizing national security, defense, climate more. So domestic care is taking more of a spotlight than a global health situation. And so then it's not just about money, it becomes a priority, which is that global health is not necessarily a priority to everybody because it doesn't affect everybody, right? I'm going to go into that maybe a bit later about, like, is global health really global? But the fact is, right now, looking at global health architecture, you are looking at a system that is fragile. It's built on charitable impulses rather than a structural responsibility. It is always at risk because of that. And you need institutions that are resilient. You need them, to be able to take care of things, not when money is flowing, but also when it stops. And that is where we're having an issue, and where lower income countries who are more reliant and who are actually receiving the funds and are reliant on those received funds could then have a collapse because of the shock of that is left from donors pulling out. All right, I want to move on a bit. We have actually, just to give a perspective of, like, the actual title, talking about reducing urgency, like fewer agencies, and what that's kind of about. Peter Sands here, the executive director of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, said in this summit, I don't think I mentioned, but this is an article basically talking about the World Health Summit that happened in Berlin. The article itself came out on 16th of October, so like 11 days ago, roughly, of when I'm recording this. So 2 weeks, I'm guessing, before I post this. I don't know. But he did say that I do think we're going to have to reduce the number of entities. And he went on to further state that at this point, if you're somebody from outside the world of global health, it's pretty confusing, right? So many cross currents, so many acronyms, trying to explain where to place your bets as a new donor is not a trivial thing to do. He's not wrong when he says this. You have an institutional argument that this system is fragmented. It's overlapping, it's confusing, and that's a cost both administratively and strategically. Because if donors and governments are unsure about where to invest and what their investments will actually accomplish, then people will be hesitant to invest. And this means that money also could be easily siphoned off or due to inefficiencies or delays. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to think about this for a second before I say this, but thinking about just generally, not in a global health scenario, but if you are giving an organization money, you want to know where it's going and you want that it's going where you intend for it to go. Because if it's too confusing, I don't think this is going to happen to everybody, but there's a slight bit of paranoia in the donor who's thinking, well, if it's too confusing, I can't tell where my money is going. It could easily be lining someone's pocket and not achieving its goal. Now, I'm saying that with a much more like general, vague situation in mind, but like that can be a back thought, like a thought in the back of people's minds when when nations maybe, or like individuals who have the funds to donate and are just donating for a global health point of view to the global fund could be worrying about. So then comes to the point of reducing agencies, right? When you have reduced agencies, you risk losing specialized mandates. So agencies that focus on specific diseases, regions, these might disappear, and there may be more of an overall focus, but that's can allow things to fall through the cracks, sort of, or like get forgotten. And we've seen that in the past, where I think, what was I gonna say? Where small, when like big agencies have absorbed smaller ones, diseases that are like tropical diseases or more rural mental health programs, these get neglected, right? These get pushed out. So it may not help efficiency. It may help reduce overheads and duplication. So it could lead to more centralization of power. It could lead to, I don't know, better workload and a better direction of finances. But I'm not sure if the issue is that there's too many agencies or the issue is there's not enough collaboration between agencies. Now, this is just my own opinion, sort of, but reading through this article, I think the issue is the lack of collaboration. Because if there's a number of agencies that aren't communicating, aren't collaborating, they lack coordination. And that's when they're competing for funds, operating in silos, they're creating duplication, and funds are getting split into things that are potentially doing the same thing. So what we need is more transparent shared data platforms, things to help with like showing that, you know, and this is going to sound like I'm repeating myself, which I am, but a transparent format that says, okay, this agency is, their funds are going exactly to this, so that every other agency knows, okay, well, that issue is being dealt with. We don't have to put the funds that we got into that. We can put it into X, Y, and Z that's on that side of the point, and it goes there. Like, those are the things that need to happen. But when you come back to the issue of funding cuts, right? Not only are you trying to reduce agencies, which then, like I said, may leave things that are just not focused on as much, you have funding cuts. And how are then countries supposed to remain resistant to those issues? I had some highlights here to talk about it, but like here in 2024, the UN and partner organizations appealed for a $46.4 billion appeal to assist 180 million people across 72 countries. Fundings that health agencies must now compete for and convince policymakers to support. Again, another issue of competing agencies. Axel Prius, not sure, president of the World Health Summit, said that abrupt US withdrawal will cost lives. Estimations are that double-digit million figures of lives are lost, which due to this abrupt change. Now, again, he goes on to say this exposed their system, which I think is a great thing to actually lay out there, that yes, your system is fragile, is fragmented, it has issues. But we've seen that there are examples of resilience with cuts and with adaptive systems that have adapted to funding cuts in these issues. Countries like Rwanda, Bangladesh, they have shown how domestic health strengthens or system strengthening community health workers, local financing can reduce dependence on donor flows. At the same time, regions have shifted from are shifting towards a regional manufacturing of vaccines and diagnostics, building their local capacity so they don't have to be so reliant. And I think that is the best goal. You need to get to a point where countries and nations are self-reliant, but why are they not? Right? I'm going to talk about. I mentioned that. Sorry, it's easy to lose track and all of this and with the weird highlights and everything. But the issue of countries not being reliant or self-reliant is not just because it happened, right? Countries didn't just suddenly overnight turn into turmoil. They didn't just suddenly become reliant on global funding and needing aid and stuff like that. There have been situations that they've been put in. Now, before I move on to that, I want to highlight these words. Where first, it says right here, this quote or this highlighted portion, which is that the majority of global health institutions are funded through sequential replenishment. Funding campaigns, often concurrent, creating competition for finite resources that are now extends across the broader humanitarian world, right? And as funds dwindle, streamlining coordination aid efforts becomes crucial to maximize what funds remain. Now, is the current model of replenishment sustainable? This is Sanya Nistar, chief executive of Gavi, saying that she doesn't think so. It's not going to move forward. Whatever all of us have been able to achieve is because generosity of donors. Love the wording. We do not have the divine right to funding. Now, when you phrase it like that, in my opinion, it's as if, yes, everyone has a right to do with their own money what they please, but is that money always been theirs? If you look, I think I mentioned this already, I don't know if I have, but a lot of the nations that maybe are struggling, maybe need funding, maybe are currently considered developing, at one point in time, those may have been a booming civilization, an ancient civilization, which are now almost rubble. It's just desecrated civilizations now. And those didn't happen overnight, and they don't always happen internally. It's not like these places just imploded. But a lot of nations, they were plundered, they were looted, they were exploited, and now they've been left in this sort of situation where they need funding. So when you say these lines, if you don't have a divine right to funding, if you don't have a divine right to funding, what then, right? So who are you looking for that is going to help in this funding crisis? Because it is a funding crisis, but it's also a governance crisis. It's a global health architectural crisis. And when you're in this situation, it becomes a question of who decides where the funds goes, who's leading, whose funds are they. The most important one, which comes back to my topic of, these were nations that were looted, plundered, desecrated. Who is held accountable, right? Because yes, the US is arguably the biggest funder for global health based on some of the metrics given here. But at the same time, it has done its fair share to leave nations in need for global health funding, right? Same with the UK. The UK has maybe done worse or maybe more. And just to think of some situations, I think at one point in time, Afghanistan was a net food exporter. Now look at it. They have barely any food for themselves. There's other nations in the world, Iraq, Palestine, these are all nations that at one point in time they were booming. Now they need help. And the question becomes, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with providing funding, right? This is where you need a mentality switch, right? You need to adjust the system, because stop looking at this issue as an issue of metrics in terms of counting dollars. You should be counting the number of lives you save, not the amount of dollars you spent. Right? Systems need to be strengthened. The dependence needs to be reduced. Yes. But at the same time, if it's not donations and you're expecting maybe more of a loan format, which this article does mention that maybe shifting towards a loan format, if donors are donating as much as they can, the next option would be to just take out loans or something like that. Well, then you're just increasing the dependence. You're not helping the nation. That's just going to eventually get more and more and more loans. And a lot of these nations are never going to pay it back. So what are you going to do? Annex them? Which there's some people in the world who would love to do that. But it's the inhumanity of it is what appalls me, and is where like the emotions come out. And I'm trying to not get like too riled up and go on a rant, which I'm failing at, by the way. But if you need to create a more sustainable model, where maybe regional fundings are robust, domestic health financing is growing, multilateral agencies are more acting as coordinators than like fund receivers, and again shifting that mentality from counting, I've spent this much money on the situation, and like, okay, I've saved this many lives, right? And this kind of comes back to, I think, something I said earlier. I don't know if I have any more points about this. No, I'm just going to leave it here for a second. But I mentioned earlier about the global health not really being global anymore. This is because of the over-reliance or the power dynamics that are in this situation. You have a field that is dominated by few donor nations, where one nation's decision can destabilize a region's health system. A global health architecture that resembles a hierarchy is not what's needed. We need a network. We need something that's equitable, something that's fair, something where people have equal voices. And we've seen this not only in just global health, we see it in the UN. I think, what was it? Finland recently at a UN meeting discussed the charter and discussed how nations should not have veto powers. Now, I'm not saying this is the same situation. There's the whole, again, multiple different arguments can be made about multiple different topics. But coming back to this, when you have such a dominated field of donors, there becomes a power struggle regardless. And it's not, and I'm not even like saying that, oh, this is only going to happen at such high fields. I feel like regardless of what situation you're in, as soon as you give someone money, regardless of whether it's a loan or a gift, there a slight power dynamic exists, right? Because if it's a loan, that is a business. That's a business transaction. That's not like you loaning your friend. That is instantly a power dynamic because they owe you. If it's a gift, it may not be as blatant as they owe you, but it may be a mental struggle. And when you've got one person saying, oh, well, I've donated, 10 billion, so I should have a say in where it goes or what it does or, all of that. And the other person saying, well, I've only donated 1 billion, but surely I should have a say too, whatever. It's not about the money. It's about the lives that you're trying to help. It's about the lives you're trying to save. Like, I don't know, the fact that it's not that simple is what irks me. Irk is probably too light of a word. It annoys the hell out of me because it's not that simple. And for it to be truly global, governance needs to be shared. Finances need to be diversified. Priority setting needs to be done, and including voices from the global south, right? And the article even warns themselves, saying that like if the architecture of global health doesn't change now, in the next decade, we'll see widening health inequities. I mean, these are issues. These are very pertinent issues. And if you're wondering, okay, and I'm gonna go through a couple of different topics. I already mentioned this 27%, I think. Did I? I've lost track. I'm sorry. But in case I didn't, the UNAIDS shouldering 73%, the rest of the world shouldering 27%. That isn't right. Agreed. I think I did mention it. There should be more of a balance just because you shouldn't be so heavily reliant on one country. And then here, okay, I'm going to take a sip of water before I continue. All right. Here, WHO chief, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, apologies again, says the US has every right to use money the way it wants. I don't think anyone can criticize the US for withdrawing its funds or its support. But there could have been a transition or an exit strategy, for instance, 6 to 12 months. You know what? Yeah. Sorry. I agree. You have the right to use your money how you want. My moral compass says that if you have, as a great man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. If you have the funds, why not help, right? That would be the first idea. And we've seen there's a graphic here which I'll go through about the funding and how it's falling short in certain locations. Uh, but that's sort of my peace of mind. Like if you have the funds and you have the availability to help, why not? And we look, so coming to this graphic, you see that they are falling short. Funds are dropping across most health organizations from 2024 to 2025. So NGOs and foundations dropping from 11 billion to 8 billion. That's a 22.8% drop. CEPI or CPI from 313 million to 247. That's 21%. 6 billion to 5 billion for UN agencies. 4 to 3 for WHO. Global Fund 5 to 4. Gavi stayed relatively the same, a 5% drop, but I guess it's not been a huge difference. World Bank 0.7% drop. That's not bad. Regional development banks up by 0.1% of a billion. 0.1% of a billion. What is that? Like, I don't know. I'm guessing like a million or something, or like 100,000. I could be wrong. It's more than 10. I know that much, and it's somewhere between 10,000 to a million, and in a factor of 10. Gates Foundation up by 0.2%, but I respect the heck out of the Bill Gates and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation does so much as an organization, just fun, like with what the Gates family is trying to do. I appreciate the heck out of what they try to do. And I think if billionaires in the world did more of that, or at least if they did, we'd be in a much better situation. But if you're wondering, I'm going to actually leave this here for a second before I start reading. I'm taking a sip of water. But if you're wondering, all the money that the US, EU, these places are giving, surely that's all that they can give, right? That's probably all that they're spending. They're trying to focus it mostly on health and, humanitarian causes and world healthcare. For sure. Of course. Why would they ever do anything different? What does this say? I'm wondering, curious. EU member states defense expenditure reaches 343 billion in 2024. A large number, surely. That's less than health expenditure, right? And is expected to rise to 381 billion in 2025, a 19% increase from the previous year and 37% higher than 2021. The US defense budget was approximately $874 billion in 2024. 874 billion. Do you know how much money that is? I can't even think how much money that is. I feel like if you had that in what's the highest? $100 bill is the highest thing goes. If you had that much in $100 bills in multiple stacks, you could fill an entire mansion. So surely that's because they're spending more on healthcare, and they're probably spending a lot more on global health initiatives, right? But what did we talk about earlier? That 9 billion that the US is not giving anymore. That 9 billion price tag that the US gap has caused in global health funding, in perspective, is 2.4% of the EU's defense spending and 0.66% of the combined EU defense outlays. 9 billion out of 874. That's what? Nearly 1%? A little over 1%, probably. I don't understand the world. Why are you focusing so much on your defense budget? Why? Global health, human lives, that is more of a factor. Yes, defense matters, but you know what you might not need if you have proper, equitable nations in the world where people are prospering and don't feel the need to take from other nations. You know what you might not need if that happens? Defense. Because there's a mutual respect, there's a mutual humanity, there's people who have good lives. Oh, God. Majority of the times, nations attack one another because they want something from the other one. If you have enough from your own country that you don't need anything more, unless you're greedy as hell, which, world leaders and nations are, we've seen that. But if you, at the very base minimum, citizens have enough, and global health is satisfied, maybe you won't need as much on defense. Just a thought. Here's a little graphic that shows the relative reduction in total health spending during reduced developmental assistance. And here comes back to the other topic that I mentioned and why I respect the heck out of Bill and Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation, is that the funding crisis is not confined to traditional Western aid budgets, but around 200 individuals, firstly, exceeding $10 billion net worths. I didn't even realize there were 200 individuals in the world who have more than $10 billion net worths. But they collectively hold $5 trillion in net worth and could fund the current shortfall for 500 years and have money to spare. That's where we need that, like, so, okay, I know there's arguments that people say about like, oh, no one should be a billionaire, no one should have that type of money. If you've worked for it, I can't fault you for that. You've made that type of money, you've worked for it, fair enough. But if you are worked and if you're a billionaire and there's people in the world who can't afford to eat or can't afford basic human health care, and that even is a case in your own company. Let's say if you're an American company and you have workers who can't afford on enough of a salary to have a comfortable life and own a house, right? Then you should not be a billionaire, because that means you are hoarding money from your workers. The same way, I feel like if you have nearly $1 trillion like Elon Musk, nearly $1 trillion like Jeff Bezos, what are you doing for the global health initiatives, right? Like, surely you should have something more to give. And I know Amazon has some charities that it donates to. I know Tesla probably has some. If I'm wrong and they do a lot more than I know of, please tell me, because I would genuinely like to be wrong about this situation. But I don't know if they're giving $4 billion, dollars for global health funding like the Gates Foundation is, and that's yearly, not even like a one-time thing. Furthermore, even Saudi Arabia's public investment fund is an issue. They have estimated at $1 trillion that could help sustain global health funding for over a century. I'm gonna actually highlight this now because I love that. Okay, that didn't highlight. Whatever. Global health funding for over a century. But they're giving $10 billion to ventures like Live Golf. What even is that? And Newcastle United for, I'm guessing, a new stadium for football. Like, I love football, but why? Why does, like, renovate, fine, but like, why are you spending $10 billion on initiatives such as these and like various international tournaments? Focus on global health, focus on healthcare, focus on humanity. Even Africa, at the summit, African leaders had demands of a greater independence from donor systems, saying we don't want to be invited. The money that we are creating, we are leveraging, must flow through regional pools. Africa is the biggest market. All things which are relatively true and I guess are fine with. At the same time, the 2001 Abuja Declaration in Africa by the African Union leaders, where they pledged 15% of their their government budgets to health. In 2021, only 2 countries have made this target, which was South Africa and Cabo Verde. The average across the African Union countries was 7.35% of the national budget, which is half. Whatever, I guess. Yeah, this is depressing, genuinely. It needs to be heard. It needs to be brought to like light for the average like general population and people who may not be in the world of global health. But this is just depressing to listen to and even read. Currently, all developing countries, what they need is not charity. What they need is fair treatment, fair investments, fair trade, and fair terms in terms of taking loans in the market. This is again said by WHO chief Dr. Tedros. True, fair loans. Oh, it creates more dependence, but sure, if it's fair, maybe they can repay it. Doesn't cover maybe reparations of, years of colonialism, plundering, looting, all of what you want. But yeah, sure, fair, whatever. Another thing, 8 of the world's poorest countries, South Sudan, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Afghanistan, Sudan, Uganda, and Ethiopia rely on US aid for over 20% of their total foreign assistance, which have left them in a horrible situation. There's this table, which I actually find very interesting, is you have here these countries, the amount they spend, like government spending on health as a percentage of the government revenue. This is all of 2019. Government spending external debt as a service of government revenue, and the percentage points more spent on external debt service than on health. So these countries, which arguably some like developing nations with some which like need probably the most in terms of help in terms of healthcare and public health and national human health, well, I don't know what to call it anymore, are spending significantly more on their debts, which if the president of the WHO says that we should focus more on loans from markets than donations, but that's just going to increase now, isn't it? On average, 10% of government revenue on public health systems, 12% on external debt repayments as of 2019 or in 2019. This leads to, I think I'm going to start ending this off because I'm at like 35 minutes, but more than 60 countries worldwide now spend more on debt than on their health systems. That's just sad. And once again, it was stated that the first thing we need to do is to organize a planned, responsible transition from a model of aid. Yes, we've seen vulnerabilities of aid. Now we want to go away from that. We must do in an orderly way, not costing lives. That I agree. Like, fix this. I mean, this article is eye-opening to say the least, and the fact that I think it calls more about the funding crisis than it does about the issue of there being too many agencies. I'm going to stop screen sharing now because, I mean, there's no need. I'm just going to try to like summarize some of the things I've talked about, which is in this article, this conversation, what we saw is a 21% fall in development assistance for health in 1 year, 67% drop in US financing, that's $9 billion. US shouldering 73% of HIV aid in some contexts. Appeal for $46.4 billion from for trying to save 180 million lives across 72 countries, and a system that is fragmented, confusing, and broken, to say the least. I don't know, overpopulated, duplicated. Think of words and they probably mean it. I think basically global health right now is at a crossroads. We either need reform in global health architecture, financing, governments, locality, or we need to face the deeper crisis and, I don't know, say it as is, which is that right now we are in a very, very, very vulnerable place. Okay, I'm going to start ending it there. I will link the article in the description of, I don't know, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Please go check it out for yourself, read it for yourself, understand it for yourself, do your own research, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm not an expert. If you agree with my opinions, feel free to compliment me on my, I don't know, podcasting style, or give me tips. Otherwise, if you disagree and if you want to call me out and say don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to do that too, because I want to know where I messed up and where I can do better, and that's probably the best thing I can get out of this. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast, this episode of the Ash Podcast. Until next time, please stay curious, stay compassionate towards others, do your best for global health, for the healthcare of humanity, for humanity as a whole, and keep asking about how humanity and health intersect, because at the end of the day, that's how we're going to save ourselves in the future. Thank you very much.